Hello, my name is Paul Thomas Edward Cusick. I am an engineer by education and I do research in just about every area that universities teach in, mostly economics and math, physics, and medicine, medical research. I also do research on archaeology, and this paper is combining the physics, which I called astrotheology. It's the latest version of physics in since 2012, and the ancient mathematics of the Egyptians, the Hebrews, the Babylonians, the Sumerians, and the Greeks. And that's what this paper is about. It should last about 20 minutes. There's about 90 slides, and I hope you'll stick with me through it. Ancient mathematical physics. We undertook an investigation in the area of mathematical physics on the origin of the universe. My goal was to derive the universal equation, the holy grail of physics for the last 300 years, the superforce. The reason the pyramids and Stonehenge could not be interpreted is that modern science did not know as much physics as the ancient Egyptians and Hebrews knew who built them, I think. From my blog on physics, it's a discontinued blog. It's made into the paper Astrotheology. One can see all of physics that was lost in the ages. Stonehenge and the pyramids go together. The same people were behind both. They stand together. I discovered in my work that the Egyptians already knew the universal energy equation, or the golden mean parabola. X squared minus x minus 1 equals 0, or equals a potential energy. In fact, it is embedded in the geometry of the pyramids, as we shall see, the highest achievement of the Egyptian civilization. It is interesting that these ideas were known to other cultures who most likely learned from the Egyptians. They include the Hebrews, the Scottish Jews, actually Israelites, the Irish royalty, St. Columba, and the Mayans. Nostradamus even picked up on it in his quatrains. So in this talk, I intend to show that what the Egyptians knew and how they spread it throughout the world. So here's the table of contents for the talk. It's divided into 7 parts. The Hebrew civilization is part 1. Ancient mathematical physics is part 2. Golden mean, base E, and the cubit. A cubit is 44 centimeters. Ancient mathematical physics, paper number 2. Ancient Greek physics, ancient mathematical physics, part 3, and ancient mathematical physics, part 4. So we have 4 ancient mathematical physics papers and 3 others: Hebrews, the Golden Mean, and Greeks. So part 1, the Hebrew civilization. There is a possible connection between the Egyptians, the 10 Commandments, Stonehenge, and St. Columba's Psalter. The key is the mathematics known at the time by the Egyptians. The Hebrews picked up on it from the time they were in Egypt. They then, as the lost tribes migrated around the world to the British Isles, Kazakhstan, and the tribe of Manasseh, who went to North America and became the North American Indians, they brought with them the knowledge of them encasing in the Psalter and Stonehenge. So in Egypt, Moses, you remember the story in the Bible where he was a Hebrew child born a male, and instead of being killed, he was placed by his mother in a basket and floated down a stream or river where the Pharaoh's wife was bathing, and she took the baby in and raised Moses. He was educated in the Egyptian household, Egyptian pharaohs, and he knew when he found out he was a Hebrew, he saw the abuse of his people. He led his people out of Egypt, out of slavery. So Moses would have had the full education of Egyptian science and mathematics, and Moses is granted the honor of having written the first 5 books of the Bible: the Pentateuch, Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. Their math and physics was far more advanced than previously thought by modern scholars. For example, they knew the quadratic equation, the golden mean, the energy parabola, facts which hitherto were not known until modern times. The Egyptians built these mathematical facts to preserve them in their pyramids. The Hebrews conquered the land in the Philistines, Palestine. The land was conquered in 586 BC by the Babylonians. The Hebrews were taken into captivity into Babylonia until they were released 70 years later by Cyrus. That's just basic biblical history. So the most important item that the Hebrews had was the Ark of the Covenant. It was God told the Hebrews to build this covenant to carry the Ten Commandments. And the covenant was a one-sided a covenant is a one-sided promise by God, who gave the Hebrews the Ten Commandments, which have been lost, and I believe they've been discovered again in the Minoan tablets. I have to say that for another talk or another paper. It's in another paper, so I'll do a talk on that someday. The author has found, then decoded them from what was called the undecoded Minoan tablets. They're actually the Hebrew Ten Commandments and explanation of these commandments on half a dozen other Minoan tablets in Crete. I suspect that the most prized possession of the Jews were these Ten Commandment tablets. They must have secretly sent them to Crete for safety, when Israel was taken captive in Babylon, in the Babylonian captivity in the 6th century BCE. When the 10 northern tribes left Israel, it is unknown where they went. We know from genetic testing that the Israelites went to mainly Ireland, Scotland, and Wales. Melesius from Spain carried the Y-DNA of David from the Jewish Khazaria in modern-day Kazakhstan to Egypt, and then on to Ireland through his 8 sons, 3 of whom, Ur, Heber, and Hermon, survived into Ireland, became the royalty of Ireland. They went on to found the Royal O'Briens in Munster, commonly called the L226 Irish Type 3, or the Dalcassians, which means part of Cass, or Cass. In addition, the French throne was founded by the Israelite people of Gaul. When Gaul wanted a king, they sent to Israel for a royal king of the royal house of Israel. And the fellow they sent was Makir of Narbonne, and he's an L226. Modern genetics is showing that the Hebrews traveled to Wales, Scotland, and Munster, Ireland. Interesting that this is where we get the conglomeration of the stone circles similar to Stonehenge. The geometry of the Egyptians is built into these archaeological sites. The pyramids. So I was looking at a book called Decoding the Pyramids. It is evident that these ancient people possibly knew about the physics contained in the blog. For example, the Chephren pyramid is 143.5 meters high. That is 1 minus 0.866, which is the sine of 60 degrees. The energy is equal to 1 over the sine of theta, so it's 1 over the sine of 60 degrees. The site takes up 13 acres, where we have 13 cycles of time, blocks either 2 or 2.5 tons of G equals 2, and T equals a half of the minimum energy from astrogeology. The angle of the 4-sided pyramid, 4 dimensions by 3 pyramids equals 12 dimensions. The angle is 52 degrees. I don't know why it's 52 degrees. I would have liked it if it was 57 degrees. Would have been 1 radian, but it's 52 degrees. The pyramids are all on the western side of the right-hand side of the Nile. The judgment from Matthew 25. Now the layout of the pyramids is the form of a parabola. The major pyramid is at the apex of the parabola when Jesus came. They also mark time in the pyramids by their layout. Now there are also pyramids in Russia, and they're in the Mayan territory as well. The North American Indians were the tribe of Manasseh. They're the only tribe of the Israelites that went east instead of west. And the 10 northern tribes migrated to Kazakhstan, and of course the Israelites were in Egypt as well. Perhaps the Israelites learned the secrets of Egypt and brought them to Russia and Mexico. Even the location of Egypt is 30 degrees longitude by 30 degrees latitude. This is Sinai Coast. So there's the pyramids, the Great Pyramid. Let's see, the Great Pyramid here, and we have our golden mean parabola, x squared minus x minus 1, the Shepherd Pyramid, Menaduk Pyramid. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that correctly, but anyway, you have the pyramids laid out on a parabola, the golden mean parabola. So they're significant not only as they stand alone, but as they stand relative to each other. The peak of the pyramids lies on the energy parabola, and the size of the pyramid is proportional to the derivative. So the derivative of that golden mean parabola, x squared minus x minus 1, so that equals e. So dE by dt is 2t minus 1. So at t equals 0, dE by dt equals minus 1. At t equals 1.5, 2 times the 1.5 minus 1 equals 2. The Ark of the Covenant is 1.5 by 1.5 by 2.5. The slope m equals 2 minus 2 at t equals 1.5 minus 1.5. Slope equals 2.5 at t equals 3.125, approximately pi. There's been different numbers for pi down through the history. The actual value of pi is not what we use today. It's actually 22 over 7. It's exactly 22 over 7, which is 3 plus the 7th. The pyramids encode the energy parabola known to the ancients. So now we turn to part 2 of 7 parts, the ancient mathematical physics, the first paper in that series. I mentioned there were 4 papers. So we undertook an investigation in the area of mathematical physics on the origin of the universe. My goal was to derive the universal equation, the holy grail of physics, for the last 300 years. One equation to suit the whole universe. It's the golden mean parabola. The reason the pyramids and Stonehenge could not be interpreted by modern science is that they did not know as much physics as the ancient Egyptians and Hebrews knew. And that's the key to unlocking it. Some might call it the key of David. From my blog on physics, one can see that all the physics that was lost through the ages, Stonehenge and the pyramids go together. The same people were behind both. They stand together. I discovered in my work that the Egyptians already knew the universal energy equation. In fact, it is embedded into the bare geometry of the pyramids, the highest achievement of their civilization. And one architect professor I knew said that the Egyptian pyramids were the most perfect architecture ever built. They certainly lasted long enough. And it is interesting that these ideas were known to other cultures who most likely learned from the Egyptians. They include the Hebrews, the Scottish Jews, the Irish royalty, St. Columba, and the Mayans. Nostradamus even picked up upon it in his quatrains. In this talk, I intended just to show that the Egyptians knew and how it spread throughout the world. So the Egyptian mathematics, in my investigation in physics, I derived the Cusick universal energy equation, the golden mean parabola. It's a polynomial as follows: x squared minus x minus 1 equals 0. This is the quadratic equation which were known to the Egyptian mathematicians. I was surprised to learn that they knew the quadratic equation thousands of years ago. It's amazing. They didn't have paper and pens. They might have had chalkboards, but still amazing. No calculators or computers, and yet they figured all this out. It is solved by the well-known equation that's x is equal to minus b plus minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. It's the quadratic equation, of course. So if one plugs a equal to minus 1 and c equal to minus 1, we get a solution called the golden mean, or x is equal to 1.618. That's a number like pi. It's a root of the golden mean. The other root is minus 0.618, which happens to be equal to the complex number square root of minus 1, which I've shown in other papers. The above polynomial is also expressed identically as x is equal to 1 over x minus 1. You get the golden mean problem by cross multiplying x times the x minus 1 equals 1. Bring that 1 to the other side, it's minus 1. So you have x squared minus x minus 1 equals 0. Actually equals the energy. And x times x minus 1 equals 1. X squared minus x minus 1 equals 0. 1.618 is the only number that solves this equation beside the imaginary number. So there's the golden mean triangle. It's a 1, 1, root 5 triangle. And the golden mean 1.618 is identical to, is best expressed as 1 plus or minus the square root of 5, all divided by 2. So the golden mean 1.618 is simply the quadratic equation with a equals 1 and b equals c equals minus 1. So just have some repeat more of the math there. So the Egyptian mathematicians also knew the trigonometry, which relates the length of side of a triangle by sine, cosine, and tangent. Remember sine, cosine, and tangent. Sine is the opposite over the hypotenuse, and cosine is the adjacent over the hypotenuse, and tangent is equal to the opposite over the adjacent. We know this because the geometry of the pyramids require knowledge of these facts, and they knew the Pythagoras' theorem, a squared plus b squared equals c squared, for a right triangle. So did the Egyptians know calculus? Calculus was supposedly discovered by Sir Isaac Newton or by Leibniz in Germany, but the Egyptians' knowledge of the CUEE, cubic universal energy equation, is called the parabola. The derivative involves the derivation of the rate of change of the function, another function. I think they may have known calculus in the time of the Egyptians, and I think that's where Newton picked it up. The derivative of the polynomial x squared minus x minus 1 equals 0 is simply your 2x minus 1. You stick the 2 on the x squared, bring it down, 2x minus, and the derivative of x is just 1, and the derivative of 1 is a constant, which is 0. So it's 2x minus 1. I'm more used to saying 2t minus 1, because usually the x is telling t. I suggest the ancient Egyptians may have known calculus since they had the quadratic equation and parabolas. Interesting that comets in astrotheology follow a parabola. A quirk of calculus is that the derivative of the function e to the x is equal to e to the x. That's a very important fact, because you can take the derivative of the derivative of the derivative, the first derivative, second derivative, third derivative. So we do that in astrotheology. We have S is equal to V equals A. V is the velocity, which is ds by dt, and A is dv by dt. So you have A equals ds by dt, and you have dv by dt equals dA by dt. Velocity equals the acceleration equals position. And that's one of the most important facts of astrotheology. And I believe the ancient people knew that. There's one of the pyramids, an illustration of one of the pyramids, and we just see that the ratio of these lengths, this triangle in here, is 1.619, so it's approximately 1.618. When you're building something that big and it's 2,500 years old, I suppose the numbers are going to be off by 4 significant digits. If you lay one over the other for the Great Pyramid, t equals 0.9, or 900 minus 500 equals 400 years before Christ. Y equals 1 equals energy. Alexander the Great conquered Egypt in this period. Ptolemy was made pharaoh. During the same time, the Chephren Pyramid is at 1.85, or 1850 minus 500, which is 1350. That's a very important number in astrotheology theory, 1350. King Tut became the pharaoh. Interesting, the mass of the human brain is developed 1350. It's 1.350 kilograms. The third pyramid lies at 2.5375 or 2037 BC, the end of the Old Kingdom. The area of the Great Pyramid is 13. Without going into all the mathematical physics, which is available in my papers in astrotheology and in my books, The Astrotheology, The Missing Link, there are 13 cycles of time. And one of the equations I derived in astrotheology is e squared plus e minus 2 equals t. If you put 13 into that, so 13 squared plus 13 minus 2 equals 180. 180 is 180 degrees is equal to pi. And that's time. That's a critical factor. Master theology. Finally, according to the scale drawing, the pyramids at the length of the legs 1, 2, and 2. This embodies the golden mean. 1, 2, 2 equals 5, and 1 and 2. As we know, it's 1 plus or minus the square root of 5 divided by 2. The pyramids are shown in decoding the pyramids to lie at 30 degrees longitude and 30 degrees latitude. From Pythagoras' theorem, the hypotenuse is 4.242, which is the pi minus e. 22 over 7 is pi, minus 2.718 is 2445. So it's the fourth significant digit. This is very close to pi. This is a physical constant in our universe, not revealed until astrotheology. It was sometimes called Einstein's constant. It's an historical fact that the Hebrews spent 450 years in Egypt before being led out of slavery by Moses. I think they took the universal geometric knowledge with them when they must have learned in Egypt. The Ark of the Covenant, so well described in the Hebrew scriptures, all the dimensions and the wood and everything that's in it, has the dimensions 1.5 by 1.5 by 2.5. The Ark of the Covenant is again 1.5 by 1.5 by 2.5. The slope m equals 2, minus 2 at t equals 1.5 minus 1.5. M is equal to 2.5 at t equals 3.125, which is approximately equal to pi. The pyramids encode the energy parabola known to the ancients. This indicates the Egyptian mathematicians knew elementary calculus. The slope of those tangents are derivatives of the cubic universal energy equation. Part 3, the golden mean, base E, and the cubit. So in this part, we consider the ancient Egyptian measurement called the cubit. It is the length of a man's forearm. More importantly, when mathematical operations are performed on the 44 centimeters, the golden mean results 1.680. Also, 44 centimeters divided by 1.618 equals base E, 2.718, of course. It's a constant like pi. So you have the three numbers pi, base E, and the golden mean. They're all constants. The golden mean and base E are also central to astrotheology mathematics, which indicates the level of sophistication of ancient mathematical physics. The question is how did the Egyptians come to know about the centimeter if the SI wasn't invented until the 17th century? Who told them? Where'd they get it? The cubit. A prolific term of measurement used throughout the ancient world is the cubit. It is generally thought to be the length of a man's forearm, about 44 centimeters. I propose that it is exactly 44 centimeters because the basic operation on the digits are precisely the golden mean to four significant digits. A cubit is 44 centimeters. Note the following: when multiplying, dividing, adding, and subtracting are performed on 44. We have 4 times 4 is 16. 4 divided by 4 is 1. 4 plus 4 is 8. 4 minus 4 is 0. 1.680 is the golden mean. and the centimeter was not invented until metric was invented in 1668. The golden mean parabola, x squared minus x minus 1 equals 0, was used in the dimensions and layout of the Egyptian pyramids shown in the previous paper by this author. A cubit mentioned in the Bible, Solomon's Temple, Noah's Ark, and Ezekiel's altar as a unit of measure. Biblical authors, through, that is to say, Moses, knew about the golden mean. So there's the biblical quotations here. We have Genesis, Exodus, 1 Samuel, 1 King, 2 Chronicles, and Ezekiel. So we have Noah's Ark, we have the Ark of the Covenant, the Tent of Meeting, Goliath's height, Solomon's Temple, and the altar in the temple. So we have all this embodies this mathematics, which makes sense. The Egyptians and the Babylonians also used the cubit, but it was a different measure apparently. It is thought to go back 3000 BCE in Egypt when it was 44.4 centimeters in length. The Hanging Gardens of Babylon were not constructed until around 600 BCE. So the Egypt predates that by about 2,000 years. So the Hebrews would have learned about the cubit from the Egyptians when they were in slavery there, and the measure made its way into the Hebrew scriptures. So Moses lived around, I think it was 1500, and Abraham goes back to 1800 BC. So still the Egyptians predate them by 1,000 years. Everything beautiful in the law of architecture used to be based on the human measurements and proportions. A man's forearm is a cubit. This is used in architecture up until the Middle Ages to create beautiful, well-proportioned architecture. That was abandoned, and they stopped building the cathedrals. It was abandoned, and they don't use geometry like they used to in architecture. And certainly not today, they don't. From linear algebra and astrotheology mathematics, the determinant of the universe is calculated as 4. Also note that 44 divided by 1.618 equals 2.719. Base E is 2.718, so that's pretty close. In addition, this author was visited by what's called an orb, the white sphere of light, 1 cubit in diameter. First thing I noticed about it was a cubit in diameter. So maybe this is where the Hebrews and the Egyptians got all this information from, was the orbs. I don't know any more than that about the orbs. So from topology, we have the equation of a circle here. Getting close. If we take the derivative, we end up with equation of a circle right here. And r is equal to 1 over root 2, which is the velocity and the acceleration. That's the basis of astrotheology. So concluding this part, we had the volume of an orb. A sphere is 4/3 pi r cubed. That's right here. And we let the diameter equal 44 centimeters. R equals 22 centimeters. Volume is 4/3 pi 22 cubed is equal to 44.2 diameter. That's pretty close to a cubit. That's the volume of an orb. And for a circle, x squared plus y squared equals r squared, and is equal to the volume divided by 2, all squared, which is equal to 442 squared divided by 2, which is equal to 4884. Square root of 4884 equals 2.21. So we have the roots of the golden mean equation, 1.618 and minus 0.618. The cubit, I'm not sure about this. I think this is wrong, but we'll skip that. The cubit is a measure based on on a man's forearm that was known to the Egyptians, apparently as far back as 3000 BCE. So human civilization started around 5000 BC in Samaria. So going back, and as my cousin tells me, we only had air flight for 100 years and we're already putting men in space on a regular basis. It's amazing what human beings have achieved over the centuries and what we lose, mainly because of war. So we have part 4 of 7 here. This is the Ancient Mathematical Physics paper number 2. In this part, we consider the symbolism of the Book of Foundation image. We've determined that the numbers coincide with astrotheology mathematics. It is important because it shows that the ancient world knew a lot more physics than we knew until now. In continuation of our theme that the ancients of the 6th century Babylon knew far more physics than we previously held, we provide an examination of the Jewish motif Sefer Yezerai, the Book of Foundation, from Jewish mysticism. The Book of Foundation contains the symbols that date from the 6th century BCE. The Jews were in exile in that period. They provide a picture of an equilateral triangle surrounded by Hebrew letters, which all have alphanumeric equivalents. I'll show you that illustration in the next slide. Figure 1 is God and the universe according to the reference. These letters and corresponding numbers of the Hebrew alphabet make up the entire model of the name of God and the principles that govern the universe. So there's from the Book of Foundations. This number in here is pi, 3.142. The numbers are mixed up. This is an equilateral triangle. You have 60 degrees, 60 degrees, of course 60 degrees. And then you have the Hebrew letters which translated into different numbers. And these are all a code to show astrotheology, which I'll show you in the next slide. So there we go. In the center, 1, 2, 3, 4 make up pi. 3.14159 is approximately equal to 3.142, which is 1, 2, 3, 4. In the first ring, 300 plus 1 plus 9 is equal to 31.8. Hertz is the frequency of the human mind. It's 1 over pi. In the second ring, 3 plus 200 is the dampened cosine energy. 3 plus 200, yes, is 203, or 202 is the dampened cosine energy. And then 400 plus 2 is equal to 402, which is the Reynolds number for the universe. And 20 plus 10 plus 2 equals 32 is approximately equal to 31.8. Again, the frequency of the human mind. In the third ring, we have 990 plus 100 plus 5 is equal to 195. The number 196 is considered infinite by mathematicians. When you perform operations on 196, the digits 1, 9, and 6, going forward and backwards, you end up with infinity. So it's an infinite number. Frequency of the human mind is 31.8 Hertz. 10 plus 30 plus 2 is equal to 0.4233, which is equal to pi minus base E, 4233, resistance to mass formation. That's using the standard value for pi here. 40% of a cycle is 1 radian. 1 radian. That appears a lot in astrotheology. And the third ring adds up to 2.665, which is approximately 2.66, or 6.66, which is the gravitational constant. The second ring adds to 337. Another important number in astrotheology is 338. And the only number unaccounted for is 70 at the top of the ring. It is the 70 weeks of Daniel. The book of Daniel was likely written in the 6th century BC when the Jews were in exile. It is an end-time book. So the ancient diagram illustrates that the Jews knew a lot more physics than previously thought, even more than known henceforth. The Jews may not have known it, but maybe no one else did. The Jews likely got this theoretical physics from the Babylonians, who built the Hanging Gardens of Nineveh based on astrotheology data. So part 5 of 7 parts is the ancient Greek physics. In this paper, we examine the physics of the early Greeks. We find that their system of science and of natural philosophy lends itself to astrotheology of today. It is important because it shows that the ancients knew more physics than we knew today. In the reading of G.E.R. Lloyd's book, Early Greek Science, Thales to Aristotle, I came across the illustration of the squares and triangles of the ancient Greek scientists. I think they're attributed to Plato, but may have been handed down from previous thinkers. We don't know. I put some dimensions to these illustrations of the squares and equilateral triangles and discovered that the key ratios from astrotheology theory was a perfect fit to the Greek model of the universe. Whole ratios are found from the squares and the triangles. The two poles, wet and dry, cold and hot, sine and cosine, so important in IT math, astrotheology theory, is illustrated here. Also, the two triangles and the trigonometry include the 30-60-90 triangle and the 45-degree triangle, 1-1-√2 triangle. Clearly, the Greeks knew advanced cosmology theory based on AT math that the author had developed in 2012. The ancient Greek scientists knew more physics than we knew. So there's the triangles. So it's interesting. We have water as the number 3, and we have the superforce has 8. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And E min, minimum energy, is 1/8. And this one we have 1, 2, 3, 4. The period is a quarter, 0.25. And 1/2 is a half. It's a minimum time. And the energy in time is equal to 1. And this is 1/3. Water is 3, so 1 divided by 3 is 1/c, which is important in astrotheology. 1/the speed of light. 2/3 is the gravitational constant. 4/3 is space, and 8/3 is the superforce. There's your equilateral triangles. You have the 60-60-60 triangle, equilateral, and you have it's a 1-2√3 triangle. And when you do a bit of geometry to the equilateral triangle, you have a 1-1√3 triangle. You have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 of them. The ancients are famous for the theory of everything that includes air, fire, earth, and water. I think we've been misunderstanding the meaning. Air is fluid in motion, given by the formula kinetic energy, which is equal to time, is 1/2 rho v squared. Fire is heat, Q, symbolized by Q in thermodynamics. Earth is mass, which is equal to the potential energy, equals mc squared. And water is potential energy, mgh. So we have potential energy, kinetic energy, heat, and I say kinetic energy. This yields the total energy. Thus, the Greeks were telling us everything is made of these 4 elements. They're talking about energy. See below. So here's a diagram here where fire is 1, water is 3, earth is 4, energy is 6. We add these up, we end up with 3. 6 minus 9 is 3 is equal to speed of light c. We have the formula to total energy, the potential plus kinetic plus heat, mgh plus mc squared plus 1/2 rho v squared plus ftd. Q is equal to TDS. And this 4.482 is a ln of 1.5. 1.5 is the mass cap. we end up with 8.318 minus 6 equals 23.18, which is the ln of pi. Pi is time. There's your two-pole solution. You have the two poles, 0 and 1, and you have the two poles are wet and hot, dry and cold. So two-pole solution is right here where the sine and cosine meet. This is equal to 707, 1 over root 2. Pi by 4. The Greek scientists and philosophers also projects the frequency of the human mind 1 over pi, and how the mind is tuned to pick up the universal signal, which is E equals minus 1.25 from the minimum from the golden mean parabola. Remember the golden mean parabola? The minimum occurs at 1.25. Actually minus 1.25. That occurs when t is equal to a half. T is equal to a half here. So the soul was conceived as a harmonia or an attunement, and its welfare depends on it well tuned and orderly. Cosmos, the world order of the cosmos itself. So minus 1.25 multiplied by 1 over pi equals 1 over 251, which is 1 over the period, which is equal to 1 over t, which is equal to E. The Greeks knew that everything flows. This coincides with the ether from astrotheology theory that is continually flowing with a Reynolds number of 402. This translates today to the kinetic energy of the Greek air, something that flows. Kinetic energy equals 1/2 rho v squared. The Milesians had taken it granted for that change occurs. Can we trust the senses, or should we rely on reason alone? Changes certainly seem to occur, but do the appearances correspond to the underlying reality, or are they a misleading guide? In AT math, we have that the function equals the derivative, y equals y prime. AT math tells us that the mind and the soul meet with the universal signal where y equals y prime. The mind evolved to pick up on the signal from the universe. The underlying force is the gravity, which is equal to 2/3. The atoms are infinite in number and dispersed through an infinite void. They are, moreover, in continuous motion, and their movements give rise to constant collisions between them. Leucippus may be said to have postulated an infinite plurality of elastic ones. This void may be referring to the space that is occupied by the ether. So I wrote papers on the ether as Teflon, which is the third lowest friction. The three main elements in Plato's cosmological scheme are then, first, the forms, second, the particulars modeled on them, and third, the agent who does the modeling, the craftsman. So we have the forms, we have the particulars, and we have the agent who does the modeling. The craftsman does not create the world in the sense of creating the matter of which it is made, rather he imagines taking over pre-existing matter. In fact, if God is energy, God, the universe is God, and it says in the scriptures, in him we live and move and have our being. There's just an illustration showing what I just read about. The key fact here is that the mass is equal to 1.17.8 from the periodic table of the elements. When you multiply these three figures together, 1/7, 1/7, and 1 over root 3. So Let's speed up a little bit here. An interesting fact from astrotheology is that if you take 1 over the mass, it's 1 over 81, 1 over c to the 4th, is equal to 0.1234567 So if you add a 7th to each one of these digits, 1 plus a 7th, 2, 2 plus 1 plus a 7th, 2 plus a 7th, 3 plus a 7th, it crests over at 8. So you have no 8, it crests over by 2. And that's equal to the rate of change of mass with respect to time, dm by dt. That's a very important fact in astrotheology. Recall that for Aristotle, the universe is finite in extent and spherical shape. I say it's actually ellipsoid, which is the shape of an egg from astrotheology, and it's finite. The heaven might be infinite. This fits with the astrotheology theory, except that the universe is an ellipsoid. Aristotle argued that there is nothing, not even a void, outside the finite universe. We don't know. We might find out when we see what this new telescope, the James Webb Telescope, brings us. We should learn a lot from that. Aristotle also considered time as a number associated with distance. He defines time as the number of motion with respect to before and after and continuous. AT math presents time simply as kinetic energy 1/2 mv squared. People didn't know what time was. Even recently, they didn't know what time was. Time is just simply kinetic energy, 1/2 mv squared. You can't have negative time because you can't have motion less than 0. Even motion 0, the absolute value of motion is always going to be a positive number. Skip that one and jump ahead a few slides here. So early Greek scientists knew more physics in 500 BC, before Christ, than the most highly educated physicists of today, until recently with the development of astrotheology by this author. Part 6, Ancient Mathematical Physics 2. Let's see. The Physicoi cosmos of physics, or the cosmos of the pre-Socratic philosophers, shows that they knew what modern physics had only discovered in 2012 in astrotheology. This paper, this part, illustrates what some of the pre-Socratics knew and how they expressed it. Ultimately, the key was known to Plato, who kept it secret for the most part. In this paper, we consider what the pre-Socratic philosophers thought about cosmology and creation. We see that some of their theories line up with astrotheology theory. In previous papers, Ancient Mathematical Physics 1 and 2, I have shown that the Egyptians and Babylonians knew a lot more mathematical physics than we do today, up until astrotheology, which was uncovered in 2012. We will consider what the major pre-Socratic philosophers thought, said, and wrote about cosmology. We begin with the first philosopher, Thales. The main source for quotations is Grayling's The History of Philosophy. Thales reports that a magnet has a soul because it moves iron, and soul is mixed in with the whole universe. At the very beginning of philosophy, the conceptual reasons for explaining motion, kinetic energy, and change, potential energy, were few. From physics, we know that total energy is equal to potential energy plus kinetic energy. So TE equals PE plus KE. Kinetic energy is equal to time. So kinetic energy is 1/2 mv squared equals time. And from that, we can build up the universe because mass is equal to the ln of T. We have our T, we have our M. And then we can build from there. Space is equal to the cross product of energy and time. We get energy, total energy equal 1.5 mc squared. So we have mass, time, and energy. And we have energy and time. We have space, mass, time, energy, and space. We have all that we need to build the universe. Pythagoras, as Grayling has it, he, Pythagoras, first traveled widely in Egypt and the East, Babylon maybe, and credit some of his doctrines associated with him to his studies there. That's Pythagoras. I suggest that the science of the early Greeks was in fact borrowed from the Egyptians and the Babylonians. The Egyptians built the pyramids in 2763 BCE as proof of their knowledge of AT math. The Babylonians built the Hanging Gardens of Nineveh in 600 BCE for the same reason. Pythagoreans used dots in a pyramidal style as a mathematical puzzle and used it to explain the world. From AT math, we know the dots arranged below amount to n number of 8 in AT math, b. That's to say 1 over 81 equals 0.1224567 skips over 8. More recently in the game of life physics, where combinations of 8 choose 2 and 8 choose 3 are essential to solving many math problems. Pyramid of dots, 7 plus 6 plus 5 plus 4 plus 3 plus 2 plus 1 equals 28, which is equal to 8 choose 2. Game of life physics. Pythagoras believed that the number 10 was a natural counting number, and this draws in the log and the natural log, which are paramount in AT math. Mass is equal to the log of phi is central to astrotheology math, AT math. Pythagoras' theory, the square root of each is summed in the square of the hypotenuse. We shall see below that this is important in what Plato calls the central principle. So Pythagoras, of course, is a squared plus b squared equals c squared, where the two legs of a right triangle are equal to the hypotenuse squared. A squared plus b squared equals c squared. Pythagoras' theorem was known by Thales, the Egyptians, the Babylonians, and the Indians. The first step of true science was harmonies. The Greeks believed a lot in harmonies. The ratios 8 over 3 equals the superforce, 2 over 3 equals gravitational constant, 4 over 3 is equal to space, and E over 3, t is equal to 1. The right time is number 7, which is the economic multiplier, which isn't just applying to economics, it applies to our number 1 over 81, for example. Heraclitus, consider the following equation from Grayling's on Heraclitus' notion of physics. Conflict or tension that holds opposites together, that existence itself is made possible. So this is the notion of when you have sine and cosine, one's momentum and the other's force, the tension between them. And I think there's something to be said about the good and evil as well, in that the tension between good and evil results in the physical universe. I don't know enough about it to say any more than that. The conflict and tension are represented mathematically as sine and cosine curves. They come together at 45 degrees. This is where the function y equals sine equals its derivative y prime equals cos t, or it is where velocity equals acceleration. So the fact that the velocity equals the acceleration is the most important discovery of astrotheology. Pythagoras' talk of the air outside the cosmos which enters to separate the cosmos into distant units is also assumed the existence of what is not, at the thing that motion and changes acts upon turns into a what is. Astrotheology has the concept of an inside and an outside the universe. The superforce, SF, compresses the dark matter into form real matter or mass. The dark matter is the mass, and the spirit hovers over the seas and over the waters in Genesis before the world took form. It is in this constant motion, a swirl, as Heraclitus tells us. That at least is consistent with the central thesis that reality is an unchanging one, on the view that time exists only when there is change. That again is the same thing as saying that the kinetic energy cannot be less than zero. Equal zero, it may not even be able to equal zero, it might be asymptotic to zero, because you can't have the time stop. It is certainly hard to find a justification in the fragments of how newest imports of rotary motion, sine and cosine, come from the circle, right? That's the basis of sine and cosine is really a circle. And the relationship here to the internal mixture of things, thereby causing separation of cold from hot, rare from dense, dry from wet, and so on, polar opposites. Eventually the swirl, Reynolds number, and the ether of separation produces two separate masses, one which is a preponderance of hot, light, dry, rare elements, the other preponderance of cold, dark, wet, and common elements. The first is ether or fire, the second is air. Empedocles, the ancients spoke of love and strife. I wonder if this is not mistranslated to mean attraction and repulsion. And that'd be the difference between good and evil. One's positive, the other's negative, they're opposites. And it's the tension between them that causes the universe to exist. This lines up with the Greeks perfectly. And of course the Greeks went to Babylon and places, Egypt, to learn these things too. The cosmos is eternal and passes through cycles determined by whether it is love, which would be attraction, or strife, repulsion, that has the overall upper hand. In its best state, the universe is inert, the powers are at rest, and the four roots are unmixed, separate equilibriums. Sine equals cosine. Empedocles' sphere does not long remain in stasis, for strife begins with wax in power, pulling the bonds forged by love and thus initiating a tug of war between them, from which arises the plenitude of things. It's a beautiful way of putting it. Momentum and force are important in AT. One is derived from mass times velocity, and the other from mass times acceleration. It is when these two are equal the cosmos comes into existence, a plenitude of things. So Plato reserved his views for his pupils about the ultimate principle of things, of which there are two. The reality is one, and it manifests itself through the action upon it of something called the infinite dyad, which is opposites. The principle is Euler's identity and figures big in AT math, astrotheology. Sine squared plus cos squared equals 1 squared. And that's the same as a squared plus b squared equals 1 squared, the radius squared. Take the derivative, you have sine equals cosine, and sine t squared equals 1, sine of t is equal to 1, t is equal to pi. But what is interesting, actually let me correct that. I'm sorry, I can't go back. Sine is equal to 1 at pi by 2, not pi. But what is interesting about the atomist's response to the Parmenidean argument was that there are many things Each must have the same character as the one, energy, and the atomist in effect said, fire, but why can't there be infinitely many things with the metaphorical properties of what the Eleatics call the one? Plato's immediate successor appears to have developed ideas about the one and the principle sine squared plus cos squared equals 1, whose opposition to it, E equals 1 over t and t equals 1, generates reality. So we just have some basic physics there, and what's important to pick up is the mass of a proton down here at the bottom. Sine squared plus cosine squared equals 1. Total energy plus kinetic energy equals kinetic energy plus potential energy. mc squared is potential energy. mgh is potential energy. 1/2 mv squared is kinetic energy. From Newton, we have that force is equal to gravitational constant times mass times 1 times 1. F is equal to ma. And we calculate the mass of a proton. Time here. Could the atomists have known the mass of a proton? I doubt it, but they may have. Of course, Aristotle's account of cosmology on the heavens was the best he could do with what he understood at the time. Why Aristotle did not get the information that Plato had, I do not know, other than the fact that Plato reserved the information for some and not others. He reserved the information. So what secrets did Plato know? I think these are the secrets that Plato knew. We see that the pre-Socratic philosophers of ancient Greece knew about the physics I call astrotheology, which appears to have been known by the Egyptians and Babylonians. So the final part is a short part, I hope. We're running in 60 minutes almost here. So this is part 7, Ancient Mathematical Physics, part 4. This paper is number 4 in a series investigating the possibility that ancient cultures, here Sumeria, knew a lot more mathematical physics than we knew until 2012. This paper considers the area under the golden mean parabola and many physical variables that flow from that. Sumerians could have known that Q equal the Q equation from nuclear physics, allowing them to unite cosmology and atomic physics. I've written a paper on uniting cosmology and atomic physics. Finally, we consider Euler's critical column load and why Sumerian temples were 3, 4, and 7 stories. In this part, we continue with the theme of the ancient civilizations of Mesopotamia, Sumeria, and Egypt knew more mathematical physics than we thought. We provide calculations showing what might have been known based on what we know they knew for certain. The Sumerians, the oldest human civilization, which formed around 5000 BCE, knew the golden mean parabola. Therefore, they must have known the roots, which are the golden mean ratios. They must have known the quadratic equation. Q is equal to 1 plus or minus the square root of 5 divided by 2. That's the golden mean, 1.618. And logarithmic values. They also assumed that the universe was made up of atoms. Could they have known that something about the electrons scattering like billiard balls? The Mesopotamian had a ball game, but it was more basketball and soccer than billiards. They did have the 10 pins bowling, which models the interaction of one neuron hitting another. Temples. The Sumerian temples had a ziggurat in 3, 4, or 7 stories. There is, of course, the speed of light. 3, of course, is the speed of light. 4 is the determinant of the universe, linear algebra, and 7 is the inverse of the multiplier. 1 over 7 is the multiplier. In nuclear physics, energy, mass, time, momentum is conserved. So we have potential energy equals mc squared. Momentum is equal to mv. Let v equals c, it's equal to mc. They can calculate the total energy, minus 1.25, which they knew from the golden mean parabola, and the area under the curve. They calculated mass because they knew pi. So there's the total energy is equal to mass multiplied by 1 over pi. And then you have mc squared plus mg plus 1/2 mv squared plus q. Rate of change of energy, the second derivative of energy is equal to g. E is equal to t squared minus t minus 1, the golden mean parabola. dE by dt is 2t minus 1. d2E by dt2 is equal to 2, which is equal to dm by dt. Rate of change in mass back to time. We integrate these, we have E equals root 2. And root 2 is where sine and cosine, when you add them together, 1 over root 2 plus 1 over root 2 equals 2 over root 2, which is equal to root 2. So that's where sine and cosine are 45 degrees. So they have Q from the total energy equation. They have the quadratic equation, which is the most general nuclear reaction. There are 11 dimensions of the astrotheology theory of the universe. And I think they are the mass, the momentum, the total energy, mass, momentum, total energy, gravity, dm by t, dt, velocity. We have the acceleration. We have pi is time, force, and speed of light. So to calculate the area bounded by the x-axis in the golden mean problem, we need to take the integral. For that, we need cubed roots, square roots, multiplication, division, addition, and subtraction. So the cubed root is actually equal to minus 8. T is equal to minus 2. And it's also equal to 1 plus or minus the square root of 3. I'll have to get into that in another paper. I'm running out of time here. Anyway, we have the integral of the golden mean parabola. Sorry. And this is equal to minus 1.248, approximately equal minus 1.25. So this is the golden mean parabola here. And this is the ln function. This is the critical point right here. When E equals 0, this is E. This is T down here. When E is 0 and T is 1 is when the universe begins to exist. And it runs through a cycle until T equals pi. So I'm afraid I don't have time to go into these slides. All the calculations. Impact load, that's an impulse. So the Sumerian civilization had many firsts, including the first arch, column, vault, and dome. We knew from modern mechanics and materials that deflection is given by the differential equation dy by dx is equal to m over ei, where m is equal to the moment. dy by dx is equal to deflection d, so the moment is equal to deflection times ei. Ei equals m over the deflection. That's basic mechanics. The Sumerians built the ziggurat temples in 3, 4, 7 stories. 3 is the speed of light, 4 is the determinant, and 7 is the economic multiplier. So the Babylonians may have known Euler's critical column load. They may have known the stress is force over area. They may have known calculus. Dy by dx equals m over ei. That's Genesis 1, 6, 8. God said, let there be a dome. The critical of the dome we just mentioned. That the Sumerians knew in the middle of the water. Let it divide from the water. God made the dome and divided the water under the dome from the water above the dome. This is how it was, and God called the dome sky. So there was evening and there was morning the second day. So Moses, of course, wrote the Genesis, and He got his education in Egypt. And they also spent time in Babylon, of course, the Israelites, the Hebrews. So here's a dome, and this is how structural engineers look at a dome, with the load and reactions. So the Sumerians knew of the arch and the dome besides the column. The structural calculations give us the gravitational constant, G. Could they have known the gravitational constant in their cosmology? So there is one of their temples, and we see a 1, 2, root 3 triangle, 30, 60, 90. And the period is 0.25 times 5 is 1.25, which is the minimum energy of the golden mean parabola. And 200 divided by 8 is equal to 0.25. So the kings of Sumer, located between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, in particular Namar, gave the command to build the ziggurat around 2000 BC. This is 500 years after Egypt built its pyramids that encased astrotheology cosmology. The ziggurat included all the proportions of ancient mathematical physics. Abraham, around 1800 BC at the age of 70, left Ur with his people and possessions. Of course, he made his way to Canaan and eventually to Egypt. He returned to Mount Moriah, where Jerusalem would later be founded. The patriarch Joseph, son of Jacob, Israel, was thrown into a well by his brothers. He was also sold into slavery by his brothers and ended up in Egypt. After a famine, Joseph and his second command of the pharaohs welcomed his brothers and other father to Egypt. This is how the Hebrews ended up in Egypt for 400 years. There, the Hebrews became enslaved. It was 400 years later that Moses, who was educated in the Egyptian household, the Pharaoh household, about 1450 BC, led the Israelites out of Egypt to the Promised Land. Moses is attributed to the writing of Genesis and the other 4 books of the Pentateuch. Moses was educated in the Pharaoh's household. He records his religious ideas and law code from Ur, 10 Commandments, where they built the ziggurats, indicating that they knew astrotheology. In fact, the Garden of Eden was reported to be where the city of Ur was in the Sumer region. This is the story of Genesis, how Genesis records the ancient mathematical physics of the Babylonians, which I call astrotheology. According to Woolley, the Akkadians had borrowed the cosmology of the Sumerians. Akkad is Babylon. The Babylonians went on to build the ancient gardens of Babylon, which encases the ratio of astrotheology 600 to 1900 years after the Egyptian pyramids. 2,000 years. So it's the time from Christ till today. That's how much time we're talking about. The architectural dome dates to 3400 to 3500 BC. The oldest Egyptian pyramid dates to 2683 BC. Therefore, astrotheology must have come out of Sumeria, not Egypt. I suppose we also know that the wise men came from the east to see the Christ child. East of Bethlehem is Samaria. So ultimately, it all comes from Samaria. Ancient civilizations such as the Babylonians and Egyptians knew the quadratic equation and the golden mean parabola. In this paper, we show Sumerians knew it, which predates Egypt and Babylon. Excuse me, there's some references. And that is all I have to say. There's 15 references there. So thank you for listening. And I'm still learning how to do this, so I hope I'm getting better at it. Anyway, this is my 10th paper. I hope you look at this paper and other papers and enjoy them. Thank you very much.